Well, welcome to the second week of our new message series, which we are calling Lost and Found. And I think it's a good title because the truth is that it is surprisingly easy, even in these times, even in the marvelous new world of universally accessible GPS, it is surprisingly easy to get lost. I have managed it, and probably some of you as well. It is easy to get lost. It's easy to get lost while we're driving in our car, even with GPS, but in a certain sense, it's even easier to get lost in the course of our life. Either way, the consequences can be serious. Perhaps not quite so serious in your car unless you're driving through the wilderness, through the middle of Algonquin Park or something. You can always just stop and ask someone for directions if your GPS doesn't seem to be doing the job. In some ways, we could say life is the same. There are certainly no shortage of people willing to give you directions. It's just that they often contradict each other. And so before you even head out on the road, you might end up confused about which direction you should go. It's easy to get lost. Well, last week we talked about how the cares and demands and anxieties of this world gather and hold our attention. There are so many of them, and many of them, in fact, are truly important, but not all of them are eternally important. We considered how we are very often preoccupied with the affairs of this world, things like work and career, politics, the pandemic, sometimes even things related to family, sports, soccer, dance, whatever it might be, things that are important, but not eternally important. We recognize that we cannot and should not ignore these things, but we also asked, will they be something the Lord asks us about when we finally meet him face to face? And we will. Will they be the measure by which our time on this earth is finally judged? They are real. They have importance. But how much? Never stopping to ask ourselves that question may leave us lost. Lost without even knowing sometimes that we are lost. But there are other ways we can become lost on our journey through this life. We can also become lost or feel lost because we can no longer see the road ahead. The burdens and the troubles of the present moment weigh us down, and carrying them, we cannot even raise our head. All we can see is where we are at this moment, and what we can see is not good. In those moments, we feel lost. We feel a bit like Job, the one who is speaking in our first reading today. I am allotted months of emptiness, and nights of misery are apportioned to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I rise? But the night is long, and I am full of tossing until dawn. We have all had moments like that in our lives. Perhaps some of you are having that moment right now. If you don't know the story of the book of Job, it begins, as you might expect, by setting the scene, and in this case, by describing Job. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. The man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Wow. Job had it all, including, as we heard, a relationship with God. God himself affirms this early in the story when he says, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. But it turns out that Satan isn't quite so convinced. He says to God, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. God disagrees. And so now the action of our story begins. In the next part of the book, we watch as everything Job has, everything he holds dear, is taken from him. one step at a time. His family, his possessions, his property, and then finally, even his health. By the time we joined the story today, Job is hard at work trying to make sense of it all, trying to make sense of his experience of months of emptiness and nights of misery. And so Job's words continue from where we began today. My days, he says, are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and come to their end without hope. Remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. Now, Job's story is one that we should all be able to recognize, at least if we're of a certain age. Not because we have all suffered to the same extent that he suffered, for another reason. Think about it. As readers of this story, we know from the beginning the reason all of this is happening. Job, on the other hand, is never told. So far as he knows, so far as he is concerned, he is simply walking in darkness, carrying an increasing burden of suffering, to the point where he cannot raise his head to look towards the horizon, towards his future. Sound familiar? To most of us, it probably does, to some extent at least. Job was a good and righteous man who suffered great evil, and who could not see his way out of that evil. Job, we might say, was lost. And so sometimes are we. A job lost, a mortgage we can't figure out how to pay, a loved one who has died, gone forever, a hope that has finally and forever been destroyed, an addiction or an illness that controls our life or the life of someone we love, a family torn apart, either completely or far enough that we know things will never be the same. Sometimes we are lost. Like Job, we have experienced evil, but also like him, which of us really believes that we deserve the evil that happens to us? Sometimes, like Job, we are just standing in the middle of trials and suffering, trying to make sense of it all. Now, today's excerpt from the book of Job is only part of a story that, of course, has a happy ending. Job is faithful to God, and in the end, everything he has is restored to him 2 times over, we're told. But the one thing that God does not give Job is an explanation. There is never a moment in that book where Job is able to say, "Oh, I know exactly why all this has happened, and here is how the bad things were necessary so that I might experience even better things." Job's not able to do that. But that is something that we Christians often try to do when we face evil, and it's not the right thing to do. At least not when we try it in the context of specific situations. It's natural, though. Our desire is to try to understand the evil in our lives. We want to be able to read our life like we read the book of Job, and be able to say, here is the reason this had to happen or that had to happen. And we want to comfort each other with that thought, with that understanding. But that is not what God tells Job when they finally speak at the end of the book, when Job lays out his complaint, and a very real complaint it was. God doesn't give Job a reason. Rather, he basically says to Job, I am God, you are not. Where were you, God says, when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? God's words to Job. Finally, Job replies, See, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but proceed no further. In other words, you are God, I am not. God seems to have satisfied Job, but has he satisfied you and me? Sometimes we might be tempted to answer no. But fortunately, God still has something more to say, and he has said it in Jesus Christ, his word made flesh. The Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. And we see Jesus doing just that in today's gospel. It's a moment that occurred early in his public ministry. We're still in the first chapter, in fact, of Mark's gospel. That evening at sunset, they brought to Jesus all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. The power of evil, spiritual and physical, is overwhelmed by the presence and power of Jesus Christ. Jesus is the word that was not spoken to Job, the word of healing and restoration. And he is the word we seek to help us understand our experience of evil. But there is more. There must be more. Because Jesus heals, but in our experience and in his ministry as recorded in the Gospels, he does not heal everyone. That is just true. Jesus, in the person of God, came among us. He walked with us. He talked with us. He lived with us. But he also suffered with us and for us. At the end of his life among us, nailed to the cross, tortured, dying, struggling for every breath, he spoke to his Father as one of us, using the words from one of the Psalms. My God, why have you forsaken me? Have we not sometimes also asked that question? Suffering is not what we expect out of a relationship with the all-powerful, all-loving God. But mysteriously, it is part of that relationship. Everything is. Like you and I, when we read the book of Job, Jesus knew perfectly well what was happening and why it was happening. And he always maintained his union, his unity with the Father. And yet in his human nature, as one of us, even though he knew and accepted the Father's plan, he stood in the same place Job stood. He stood with us in our human suffering, and with us, he asked the same question. Why? In a certain sense, in that moment on the cross, and we need to be very careful of the language we use here, but in a certain sense, in his human nature, at that moment, Jesus experienced being lost. He experienced what we experience. Our gospel story continues the day after Jesus' healing work. In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." Jesus is the word that was not yet spoken to Job. He is the answer everyone is searching for. But he is also searching for us. That is why he came among us, not to criticize, not to condemn, not to destroy, but to save. In this life, to save sometimes means to heal, but it always means to stand with us, even in our suffering, even when all we can manage to say is why. The Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. The lost will be found. Like Job, we do not always know when and how that will happen. God is God. He knows. We do not. But we do know that the Lord heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He determines the number of the stars. He gives to all of them their names. The Lord heals. He saves. Through him, with him, and in him, what is good about your life will be strengthened, and what is missing will be restored. And the one who will restore what is missing is already standing with you, and he always will. That is the ultimate answer to our question. And in realizing that, you can finally and truly become the person you desire to be, you were created to be, even in the midst of difficulties and suffering, so that what has been lost will be found, not just by the Lord, but by you as well.